So, can resistance bands build muscle? Yes, but are they the most optimal option when doing it for your home workouts? Let's talk about it. The number one draw of resistance bands is they have variable resistance, meaning that the resistance changes as you go through each rep from start to finish. When you start out, you have very little resistance on the bands, and as you contract and squeeze the muscle, you're going to have more resistance placed on the muscle throughout the entire movement. This will get you past many of the sticking points for certain exercises. For example, in a biceps curl, if you are using a very heavy weight, you might not be able to even get it past the starting position, whereas with resistance bands, it's going to be lighter at that position, and as you squeeze up, you'll be able to get to your strongest positioning with the resistance bands themselves, allowing you to progress the workout from there. Not only that, but resistance bands can easily provide progressive overload. I personally use the Undersun resistance bands as of using this video, and if I ever need to add more resistance, I can simply attach another band to my bar, and I'm good to go. Also, resistance bands reduce the risk of injury, and this is a big one for me, especially as I get older. I don't want to be slinging around too many heavy weights and then get injured doing so. Many injuries come with just getting set up for the exercise, so with resistance bands and having the least amount of tension at the beginning of the movement, you tend to have a lower chance of getting injury. Yes, you can get injured, but you just have a reduced risk of that injury occurring. And lastly, resistance bands are very portable. I can simply throw them in any backpack, even drawstring bag, and take them with me anywhere I need to. Maybe you want to work out outside, work out at a hotel, gym, whatever it might be, you can easily travel with them and use them on the go. So does this mean you can still build muscle with resistance bands? Yes, you can definitely build muscle while using resistance bands. Muscles are going to act the same way. You just need a great enough stimulus hitting that muscle to tell the body it needs to adapt and get stronger for the next time you do it. From there, you add progressive overload, and over time you get stronger and stronger, building more muscle as you damage it, repair, and get stronger with each lift. So to quickly cover the components of muscle building, let me jump into those, as there are three we should definitely cover. First off, we have mechanical tension, and this is simply the amount of resistance or force being placed on the muscle throughout the duration of the exercise. The greater the tension you place on the muscle, the greater the response from the body is going to be, and if it's great enough, you're going to have a big enough stimulus to tell the body it must adapt and get stronger. This, by many people, is seen as the greatest stimulus for getting muscle growth, so you must have enough mechanical tension in order to get bigger, stronger, and develop bigger muscles over time. Our second item is metabolic stress, and this is simply where the amount of energy your muscle produces as you go through the exercise reps gets less and less and less, and your body has a hard time recovering that amount of energy to continue doing the reps as you go along. Metabolic stress might not be the greatest predictor of building muscle, but it is one of the factors that help assist in developing that stimulus your body needs to say, hey body, I need to adapt and get stronger over time. So make sure that you provide enough metabolic stress to get that adaptation going. And the third item we need to cover is muscle damage. And this is simply the damage in your muscle, just micro tears that you have in your muscle cells that need to repair afterwards using things like protein to, again, get stronger. So the next time that you do the workout, your muscles are strong enough to continue doing it, but you want to each time overload it enough so that you're still getting those tight tears each time in order to tell the body, hey, our muscles are breaking down, we need to get stronger. So the next time we have this amount of tension or force on the muscles, we can withstand it so that we don't die, in a sense. So those are the three major items you need to be aware of when building muscle. Now, of course, you need to have proper sleep, recovery, and nutrition to provide the body what it needs to recover from those workouts after putting on this much stress and damage to the muscles in your workouts. So just like any free weights or machines you would use at a gym, resistance bands can do the same thing. Each one of these items can be covered while using resistance bands, and they provide variable resistance, allowing you to potentially lift even more weight because you can get past that initial sticking point. So why do many people say that you can't build muscle with resistance bands? Most people think that the bands themselves can't provide enough tension for you to actually get a big enough stimulus to get stronger. Now, with the bands that I use and have been using for a while now, they definitely can provide that stimulus. Is it the most optimal? I will cover that in a second, but just know those people are definitely wrong, or maybe just using really light or bad bands, maybe like more like rehab bands. But the Undersun I'm using and many other loop bands that are out there can 100% provide enough tension, especially for someone just starting out, in order to build a lot of muscle. Now, one reason I've come across lately as to why resistance bands might not be the most optimal option is that they don't tend to follow the proper strength curve when doing each one of your exercises. The strength curve simply means where you go from weakest to strongest in a lift. Now let's stick with the biceps example. In this, you're actually going to start at the bottom where you are the weakest. So you have what's known as the least amount of cross-bridging with actin and myosin, which is simply the contraction of your muscles throughout the range of motion. Basically, as you go through the contraction, the amount of actin and myosin being activated to do the contraction goes up as you do them. So for a biceps curl, you start at the bottom where you have the least amount of cross-bridging. You go up about to 90 degrees, maybe a little bit more. That's where you have the most optimal overlapping. However, with resistance bands, you're not technically at the greatest resistance in the movement here. You don't get to the highest resistance until you get to that fully contracted position. However, this is actually not optimal as you again get weaker here at the top. So with bicep curls, you go from weak to strong in the middle to weak again at the top because you have bunching or overlapping actin and myosin at this point, so there's too much bunching of it to optimally work your muscles. Now, I think this is very small in terms of it making worse results for you in the end, but it is something I'm still researching into seeing if this is a bad option. Something like dumbbells, the resistance actually doesn't change that much over the whole duration of the exercise. So as you go up, you're going to start at the bottom. The weight's going to be still the same amount of weight. You're going to get to the middle where you're still going to feel that same weight. And at the top is actually where you might reduce the amount of weight you're really lifting because you might be holding it in place. So as long as you still keep tension in that, you're still going to have a lot of resistance at the top throughout the entire thing. The problem with free weights is you might get stuck at the bottom, which is most people's issues where they can't lift enough weight. But with resistance bands, as you get to the very top peak of it, you actually have too much resistance in a weaker spot of that lift. So that's how I understand it. Again, I'm still researching more into this, but I definitely think you can build muscle with resistance bands. Is it the most optimal option? No. Machines would actually be the best route so that you can stay in the strength curve, but I still think they can do a good job in building muscle when used appropriately. With all of that said, should you be using resistance bands in your home workouts? So that is going to come back with a big it depends, and I know that's not a great answer, but let's go over the reasons as to someone who should look into getting resistance bands, especially if you are new. Probably the number one reason I can think of is the cost. Resistance bands are cheap, even for the ones I'm using, coming at around $70 for a good solid pair of resistance bands. This is far, far, far less than any dumbbells you are going to buy, even the changeable dumbbells on the market today. Yes, body weight might get you cheaper than that, but you can't overload the same way you can with resistance bands and dumbbells because you just don't. It's harder to track over time, but body weight could be an option if you really want to go the cheapest route. Another option is portability. Do you travel around a lot? Is it something you want to do maybe outside, go to the beach and do it if you live in that certain area, or maybe you like to go to parks and do it there? This is certainly something that would help you out in those circumstances. So if you, again, are someone traveling around, you may want to look into resistance bands. And of course, if you're someone looking to save on a ton of space, I highly recommend resistance bands. They simply fit in my small drawstring bag. I actually bought a separate bag that's a little bigger than the Undersun one I got because it has a little compartment in the front where I can put in things like other gloves or whatever I want to use. So I bought that, but still just a small drawstring bag. I can easily throw that in any closet, even in another bag if I wanted to, and go from there. So simply, this is one of the best items for portability and if you need to store it out of sight. So now you are convinced that you want to buy resistance bands. What type now should you go and use if you are just starting out? Now, when I first started out, I used the regular tube style bands, which have the handles and carabiners on the ends. And this is perfectly fine. However, I quickly grew out of these as they just over time didn't provide all the resistance I was looking for. And now I do use a band setup where I have a bar and a platform I stand on. So I actually use that. And this works far better, in my opinion, with using loop bands. Now with loop bands, personally, I found that there is just way more resistance with these, especially if you go for the pull-up style bands. So something like the SunPow bands have quite a lot of resistance with just the 5 bands they provide at about like $40 for the whole thing. So that's really cheap and you can get a lot of resistance with just that product. Again, the Undersun don't go quite as heavy and cost a bit more, but they're more of a premium product, and I find they work better, especially if you're someone not using the bar setup I have, as they fit really good. And if you are using the bar setup, they have a little bit more leeway in getting to exercises. So like the front squat, when you have to get down in position and kind of push into that top standing position before you start the exercise, there's a little bit more give in the bands, allowing you a little bit easier access to get to that point. Also, with the loop bands, you really don't need any additional attachments unless you want them for something like protecting your palms. For me, I just have the Undersun gloves that come with it. I also have a door stopper that I set up sometimes if I want to do certain pulling exercises. But outside of that, that's really it. I don't need additional handles. You can get them, of course, if you feel uncomfortable. I might look into some in the future, but they aren't required if you're using the loop bands. If you have the tube style bands, you will definitely need the side attachments, such as handles, in order to really comfortably do each exercise. So with all that said, I'm going to throw up a video on screen here that you can click on to check out the current setup I have with my resistance bands, bar, and step platform to see if it's something you can use in your training. And with all that, remember, be fit and game on.